why you call me bastards. Hello there, ladies and lady boys. Let's do a video about the Makarov. Yes, the Russian gangster Gyatt, the AK of the pistol world, the Russian high point. This is the Makarov. In today's video, I'll be doing a little bit of a deep dive into the Makarov. Things I like, things I don't like, disassembling it, some shooting footages, and a little bit in between. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the video, and let us begin. Let's go over a brief history about the Makarov. It was first developed in 1948 by a Nikolai Makarov. I'm probably butchering his name. And designed in 1948 but formally adopted in 1953 by the Soviet military. More on why they adopted it later on in the next portion of the video. They produced more or less 5 million copies of the Makarov. I've heard conflicting numbers, but 5 million seems to be the general consensus of production built. There were 4 main countries that made the Makarovs. That would be, of course, the Soviet Union or Russia, East Germany, China, and Bulgaria. This specifically is a Bulgarian model. There would be other countries that made their Makarov-ish type pistols, such as in Poland with the Polish P64s or the P83s, and in Czechoslovakia the CZ82s. And that's just a brief little history about the Makarov. Let's actually go over a little bit about the Makarov's predecessor, the TT-33 Tokarev. Now with the Tokarev, more or less, it had a lot of bones from the 1911 tilting action, similar 1911-esque parts and such. And it was chambered in the ever so spicy 7.62x25 Tokarev at a 8-round capacity, which is not much, but it was kind of like the average at the time. And a push-button magazine release, overall very nice. Now, why would the Soviets replace the TT-33 Tokarev with the Makarov? There's a lot of answers to that question. You see, during World War II, the Tokarev would see a lot of action, right? And it would mainly be carried by officers. It was kind of like a show of honor, or kind of like a badge of honor for officers to be carrying. Kind of a piece of rank, I suppose I should say. And with the Tokarev, officers had a couple complaints during the war. They complained that it was a little too long for their liking, a little too heavy, and with the push-button magazine release, although very ergonomic in modern standings, at the time, officers had a tendency of accidentally pushing the magazine release with their grip, and by the time they fired their second shot, I'm out of ammo. And so they lost their very expensive, hard-to-come-by magazines with that method. And with the round, 7.62x25 Tokarev, its first intention was made for submachine guns. And using the round as a pistol caliber was kind of an afterthought, but they did it anyways. And with 7.62x25 Tokarev, it was a very spicy round, and so it had a lot of recoil, a little too much for officers' liking. And so by 1953, the Soviets wanted to kind of shift away to something else, and they looked to the Germans for inspiration. You know, the Soviets, they defeated the Germans during World War II, and they saw a lot of their officers was carrying the PPK or the PP from Walther, chambered in 380 ACP or 32 ACP, depending on the models, and they figured, that's a nice gun. We're gonna copy it. Is that okay? Is that okay? And so they did. And so the Russians would develop the Makarov, as I can show you guys right there. So, a lot of bones from the Walther PPK series. As you can see right here, the Walther PPK, fixed barrel, Makarov fixed barrel. It also has the side-mounted safety decocker on the side. Another thing of note about the Tokarevs, they didn't have a true safety, but rather they had a half-cock kind of mid-safety right there for their guns. But with the Makarov itself, it would be a lot cheaper to produce than the Tokarev. It would be a lot simpler since it was just a direct blowback, just like the PPK, while the Tokarev was a tilting Browning action. It had an 8-round capacity magazine. Again, not much, but still fairly common for the time. And instead of having a push-button magazine release, it would have a heel magazine release right here. So it would make magazine reloads a lot more involved, and so you wouldn't be able to lose your magazines as easily. Another thing was the development of the round. Instead of using the 7.62x25 Tokarev, the Makarov used 9x18 Makarov. So kind of like a Russian 380 ACP, although a little bit bigger. And so it would have less recoil, a more involved magazine release, just as reliable, simple to make, cheaper to make, and aesthetically pleasing. So it was kind of the obvious choice to switch out the Tokarev for the Makarov at that time. And so that is why the Tokarev was replaced by the Makarov. The Makarov is the AK of the pistol world. Let me explain. Both the Makarov and the AK took some inspiration from some German designs. With the Makarov, they took some designs from the Walther PP or PPK series, while the AK did take some notes from the STG-44. Both the Makarov and the AK sport fixed barrels. I'm too lazy to take them apart. Both the Makarov and the AK shoot Russian calibers. With the AK, it first shot the 7.62x39. Hopefully it's picking up for you guys. And later on with the AK-74s, they would switch to the 5.45x39 caliber. With the Makarov, they would be chambered in the 9x18 Makarov right here. Both platforms were designed in Russia or the Soviet Union. And both the AK and the Makarov are hammer-fired. Both the Makarov and the AK sport fairly mediocre iron sights. Both the Makarov and the AK have fairly unique magazine releases. For the Makarov, it has a heel magazine release, so it's going to go something like this, as you can see. And to take a magazine out, all you do is press right here, and the magazines will have to be ripped out. For the AK, it has a rock and lock magazine. All you have to do is press this button right here, rock forward, and the magazines will come out. Equally so, to put a magazine in, just come in at an angle and rock back and it'll lock in place. For the AK safety, up for safe, down for fire. With the Makarov, it has a slide mounted safety, up for safe, down for fire. And that is why the Makarov is the AK of the pistol world. Alrighty, so here are some general features of the Makarov itself. So it is a simple blowback pistol that is hammer fired. As you guys can see, let's focus. So just like that. And it also has a side mounted safety decocker. So down for fire, up for safe. And then whenever you're on safe, it basically kills the trigger, it kills the slide, and you're not able to pull the hammer back. But bring it back down and you have a heavy first trigger. So it is a double action, single action. The double action trigger is going to be right around a 12-pound trigger, and it is fairly crispy. And on the single action trigger, it's going to be more or less a 4.5-pound trigger. It also has a heel magazine release. Hopefully I can show you guys that right here. So let's focus. So a heel magazine release that you can take out. And you're gonna have an 8-round capacity single stack magazine. And you can see it has these like little windows right here. Let's focus, let's focus. Yeah, and so it holds right around 8 rounds. And so carrying capacity, typically 8 plus 1, 9 rounds carrying capacity. And as you can see right around here, let me find it. Yeah, so it's gonna have this little nub right here. This is actually what actuates the slide release. And speaking of slide release, we can go look at that right now. So the slide release is going to be right here, this button. So you can hold it back and release the slide. It has these rear serrations right here and then on the other side as well. Yeah. And the Makarov itself, at least the original Makarovs, shot a caliber called 9x18 Makarov. Focus, focus, focus. Yeah, so it's a little bit of a stubby round. A lot of people compare it to 9mm and 380 ACP, kind of like that little middle ground. But honestly speaking, it's more closer to 380 than it is 9mm. And yeah, those are basically general features of the Makarov. Oh, and another thing of note, we can look at the iron sights as well. So nothing special right there. And on the grips, it also has a lanyard loop that you're probably never going to use like ever. And so yeah, again, that is general features of the Makarov itself. So let's actually look at some symbols on the actual Makarov. So we'll see this is the serial number right here. And with the serial number, you can actually tell how old your Makarov is. So all you have to do is look at the number directly after the letter designation. So in this case, it would be 27. Add 60 and it will represent the number year that your Makarov was made. So in this case, 27 add 60. So this gun was produced in 1987. Again, we have these markings right here. Let's see if I can show you guys. But we also have Circle 10, denoting the Circle 10 factory in Bulgaria. Again, another serial number mark. And then on this side, this is more of an importation type deal. So it's going to have the name of the firearm, Makarov, made in Bulgaria, caliber 9mm Mac, and then CI or CAI, this would represent Century Arms International. So this would be the importer of this particular firearm. And as far as markings go, that just goes about it. And we can even look on the magazine itself. This is a matching magazine, and we could see it also has an electro pencil marking of the serial number right there. So yeah, that's kind of neat. Alrighty, so let's get to actually disassembling the Makarov. In my opinion, it is one of the easier guns to disassemble, and I'll show you why. So first things first, let's make sure it is clear so there's nothing in the mag well. We can open her up. We don't see a round in the chamber. We can also rack it a couple of times, point it in a safe direction, click, it is safe. So first what we're going to do is with the trigger well, we're going to drop it down just like that. Now I'll show you guys again in a closer view. So again, just literally drop it and it's going to move to the side right here. Next, what we're going to do is with the slide, we're going to pull it out, up and out of the way. Okay, so hard for me to explain, but I'll show you guys. So pull it out, up, and it's going to come out. Remember, it's under spring tension. Next, we can take out the recoil spring right here. And for all intents and purposes, you are completely field stripped. Again, guys, this is one of the easier disassemblies you can possibly do. Now, if you wanted to go a step further, you could disassemble the firing pin, or at least take it out. So all you have to do is, with your slide, take your safety lever and then just move it all the way up and over its path, right, like that. Then we can remove it. And then all you have to do is just, the firing pin will drop out. And so yeah, that is the Makarov fully disassembled. Let's get back to putting it back together. So with the firing pin, you want to make sure it's orientated the correct way. There's like a certain groove to it. So we'll put it right there. Make sure it's in focus. So put it right there. And then with your safety, we're just going to put it back into its path. There's a hole for it. Let's make sure that's there. Okay, so all you have to do now is just bring it back down into its path. Then just take your spring. I usually like doing it on the tighter side. Make sure we're focused, focus, focus. Okay. Alrighty, and so just put this back on. Then with the slide, you want to make sure you understand that this is under spring tension. So with the slide, bring the spring into the slide all the way back, over, and then into its original path. Let me make sure. Okay. There you go. So just like that, and then bring the trigger guard back down, and we have the Makarov fully assembled and ready to go. We can do our function test, make sure everything works, and yeah, that is the Makarov fully assembled and disassembled. Let's actually talk about the round that the Makarovs were chambered in. So with the original military Makarovs, they were chambered in 9x18 Makarov, as we can see right here. So 9x18 Makarov, right? But in the commercial variants, some of them were actually sold in 380 ACP right here. Now, they never made anything in 9mm Luger, but they kind of just went with a new platform at that point. So I can show you guys a little size comparison between the three rounds. As you can see right here, let me just get set up. A lot of people like saying that 9x18 Makarov is a lot close, is kind of like the in-between between 9mm Luger and 380 ACP, but in reality, it was a lot closer to 380 than it was to 9mm Luger, right? And for you reloading kind of guys, I know that 9x18 Makarov can be a little tricky to find, especially in 2023. So there's actually a way where you can find casings for 9x18 Makarov. You can literally take 9mm Luger casings, cut it down to size, and use that as the casing materials for the 9x18 Makarov, so long as you find the correct projectile for it. Another thing of note is I've seen some videos where people will actually take 380 ACP and shoot it out of their 9x18 Makarov pistols. Don't do that. I don't think it's good for the gun, and you might cause some catastrophic failures. So just shoot the calibers that your gun was chambered in. We can look at the magazines itself. Now, the Makarovs only have one type of magazine, these little 8-round magazines, just because of the heel magazine type. You're going to be very hard pressed to have any like larger magazine sizes. I mean, they do make, I believe, +2 base plates for these Makarovs. However, you're going to have to like basically switch out the grips as well for those dozors or those Fab Defense grips. But as you can see with the magazine design, as like a hole or a window at the side where you can see all your little rounds right there. It is a single feed, single stack magazine. It holds 8 rounds of 9x18 Makarov, as you can see. And yeah, that's just a little brief overview of the 9x18 Makarov and the Makarov rounds. Let me give you guys a quick little trigger pull that we can actually see like a little bit of a close-up and kind of understand how the trigger actually is. So again, there's nothing in the gun, no magazine, completely clear, okay? So this is the single action trigger, and again, this is a 4.5 pound trigger. As you can see, let me get some good lighting for you guys. Okay, we'll do the reset. Okay, and then we'll do the double action trigger. It's heavy, but it's smooth, so I like it that way. So typically, I probably already said this, but I do carry with it decocked. So I don't necessarily have it on safe just because that's that like one extra step. So I'll generally just carry it decocked, just like that. And it's going to have subsequent single action triggers, as you can see. Here's a little fun fact about the Makarov. You're not able to keep the Makarov in cocked and lock. And what I mean is that you're not able to keep the hammer cocked back while putting it on safe. Case in point, once I put the Makarov on safe, it automatically decocks the pistol. The Makarov has a built-in decocker. So in this stage, even though it's on safe, I'm not able to pull the hammer back. And whatever I do, I'm not able to keep that hammer back. So once you put the gun on fire, you're only relegated to a double action trigger. So just a little fun fact about the Makarov. Okay, so let's talk about a little bit on concealed carrying. Now, some people, they might say, oh, carry a SIG, carry a Glock. Some people might carry a 1911. And my first carry gun was a CZ75 D-Compact PCR, as you guys can see right there. For all intents and purposes, a very modern pistol. 9mm Luger, push-button magazine release, as you guys can see right there. Decocker right here. Modern, and it even has these like glow up or these night sights right there. Now this was my carry gun for a little bit, but I figured it was a little too bulky for my liking. Now me personally, I do have a smaller frame, and I felt as though kind of like the width of the CC75 wasn't necessarily conducive to concealed carrying for me personally. It's going to be different for other people. It's just, it kind of bulged a little too much for my liking. Now, some other people might carry something like this, the Springfield XD40. This is actually my father's gun, as you guys can see right there. And for all intents and purposes, a very modern gun. Grip safety, trigger safety, striker fired, you get it. But it wasn't necessarily doing it for me as far as like aesthetics go. And I don't know, not necessarily my favorite styles of a pistol I like to carry. But this is my carry piece, and you probably guessed it already, my Bulgarian Makarov. Yes, so this is actually my carry piece, and you might be wondering, why the hell would you carry something like that? And my answer usually is, I just think it's kind of cool. I mean, not everybody can say I conceal carry a Bulgarian Makarov, right? And in my opinion, I do believe that the Makarov does have some features that make it conducive or make it very good for concealed carry. Not perfect, but decent at least. Now, starting off from the top, I do believe it is a very safe gun to carry, right? We can look right here as a safety decocker. So, with the hammer back, just decock it, and it's pretty safe just like that. And in this state, can access the trigger, can access the slide, can access the hammer itself. And it also has a firing pin block, so you can bang on this hammer all day, all night, whatever you want, it's not going to go off. But usually whenever I conceal carry, I typically have it like this, so double action trigger, and so I'm able to access it whenever I need it. And I feel as though whenever you're carrying in double action, you need a deliberate pull of the trigger in order for it to go off. So again, this is double action, right? And so it's going to take a lot of force for that trigger to go off. So I do believe it is a little more advantageous than having to switch it off safe in order to access the firearm. Another thing too is the 9x18 round. I do believe it's still a viable round to conceal carry. Some people carry 380 ACP, and 380 ACP is smaller than 9x18 Makarov. And so, a good little workaround as well. Another thing of note too is the method I use to carry. I use this modern Kydex holster. Hopefully it'll focus for you guys. As you can see, it blocks out the trigger, it blocks out the safety, and it just has like a clip on this side, and it's very comfortable. I bought this off of Amazon for like 20 bucks or something like that, and it retains the Makarov pretty well, right? All you have to do is just pull it out, and there you have it. And it kind of just sits within the waistband. Hopefully I can show you guys, kind of like this right here. As you can see, and I can just access it from right there, and it conceal carries fairly well. As you can see, not really much of bulging at all, right? I can jump around, I can do like whatever I want. This Makarov is not going anywhere. And another thing of note as well is I really appreciate kind of like the width of the Makarov itself. As you can see, it is not a very thick pistol, at least its profile right here. And we can compare it with the other pistols. So without muzzling myself, we can see, compare, focus. Yeah, okay, so here's the Makarov versus my original CC75. And you can see there is a, there's definitely a difference right here. And we can also compare it with the Springfield XD40. Let it focus. It's kind of weird doing it this angle. So right here, focus. Let's see. Alrighty, there you go. So as you can see, yeah, the Makarov itself is a fairly thin pistol overall, and that's what I really like as well. You know, it is a heavier pistol because it is made of steel, but I don't really mind that. I kind of just carry using jeans anyways, and so they kind of like support the weight of it. But yeah, this is my concealed carry piece, and I don't know, I think it's just kind of neat. Now, is it the most practical thing ever? Maybe not, just because with those heel magazine releases, but I do think it's viable, and I think it's kind of a vibe. Okay, so this video is basically just me kind of just creaming over the Makarov all day long, and those are all the good stuff about it. But I gotta dedicate part of the video to the things I don't like about the Makarov. And let's start with the recoil impulse. Now, 9x18 Makarov, for all intents and purposes, not exactly the biggest round ever. It's more or less kind of like a 380, and we can look at that right here. I mean, it's not like the biggest round ever. However, the Makarov itself is a direct blowback pistol, so you have a lot of mass kind of just moving to the rear, and you're going to be feeling a lot of that recoil in that impulse. And so it's going to be rather a snappier pistol than you would kind of imagine with the pistol of this sort of caliber. Another thing I don't like about the Makarov itself is also kind of like the ergonomics. Now, holding it one-handed, as probably the Soviets kind of intended, it's fine. However, whenever you're having a modern kind of two-handed grip, that's where things kind of get a little more complicated. So let's use my CZ75 for reference. Now, for the CZs, they typically have a very kind of thin slide profile, as you can see. And so let's focus. And so you see very thin, and you also have a lot of frame real estate. So whenever you're doing sort of like a modern grip on the CZ75, right, you can get very high up on the pistol. Hopefully you guys can get that, right? But when it comes to the Makarov itself, it has a very kind of chunky slide. So the slide takes up a lot of the frame real estate right there. And whenever we attempt to do kind of like a modern grip, right, your hand placement is more or less all over that slide. And so you might cause possibly a malfunction. So it kind of forces you to kind of come a little lower onto the pistol itself right here. And that being said, also with your trigger hand, typically your thumb is going to ride over your support hand like this. However, we do have this side mounted safety that is going to be a little bit in the way, and it's going to really like tear up your thumb. So you're kind of forced to kind of bring it down and out just like this. Hopefully I'm showing you guys. It's kind of hard to demonstrate from this angle. But yeah, it's going to be more like this. But for me personally, the way I kind of grip the Makarov itself is kind of like this. And I know it's probably going to be a little bit odd for you guys, but this is just how I found it comfortable to hold the Makarov. I kind of hold it from here, just like this. As you can see, my shooting thumb is going to be on the inside. Sometimes it's resting on the slide release. I know, not necessarily ideal, but sometimes I just do that out of habit. And then I post my support hand over it, kind of like this, and I have sort of this gap. So it's out of the way of the slide and the safety as well. And so I kind of just hold it like that. So not exactly ideal for modern shooting grips, but I kind of just manage like that. Moving on, we can talk about another thing about the grip as well. Because of how snappy it is and kind of how thin the grips are, it can kind of not necessarily bruise up, but kind of wear out kind of like the webbing inside of your palm as well. Now let's move on. We also have the magazine release style. Now, the modern style, typically speaking, is going to be a push button magazine release. However, the Makarovs, they do have a heel magazine release. And so again, you just like that and you get your magazine release. Now, I understand why they did it back in the day. However, this isn't exactly 1953 anymore. And so with modern shooting, you know, it's going to be very hard to kind of fumble with the whole like heel magazine release and getting in and out. But you know, I'm just gonna have to like worry about that myself. Now, you could buy some Fab Defense grips or some Dozor grips, which actually lets you have kind of like a lever or a push button magazine release, and it drops the magazines out. However, in its stock configuration, you are going to have to deal with the standard heel magazine release. Along with that, it does have kind of a small mag well, as we can see right there. Let's focus on that. So you have to really just line it up and get it in. There's no real flaring out to kind of assist in those reloads. And so sometimes you might find yourself kind of fumbling, trying to get it into like the correct spot, and you get the reload. Another thing as well when it comes to the slide and the safety is it's kind of uncomfortable for me personally to kind of like rack the slide itself. Now, on my original carry gun, I do have a CZ75, and it has a thin slide. So I'm very used to kind of just doing this sort of pinch grip, right? Where I would kind of rack it like that. Now, I wouldn't necessarily rack it like this just because of how thin the slide is, right? So I was just always used to kind of racking the gun in this fashion. Now, when it comes to the Makarov, if I did something like that, actually I should show you on this side. If I did something like that, the safety kind of really digs into me, right? So it really kind of just digs into my hands, and I'm not exactly a big fan of charging it like that. So when it comes to actually charging the Makarov, you kind of have to do sort of like a clamshell grip, so kind of just like that. And you do have these serrations right here, but I find they're not very useful whenever we have, and I'm not pointing this at myself, when we have this safety right here. And yeah, you kind of have to just do something of this nature, right? A lot of people like dinging on the Makarov sights. Me personally, I find them fine, you know. They're not necessarily the best out there, but they're not as bad as a lot of people make it out to seem. Another thing about the Makarov as well is, let's talk about the ammo. It's not necessarily the Makarov's fault. I'm not going to fault it on that. But when it comes to 9x18 Makarov, it's kind of a harder round to find nowadays. You can't exactly go to the store and just buy 9x18 Makarov at your local Bass Pro Shops, at least not anymore. I remember Academy Sports and Outdoors, they used to have that Monarch steel case 9x18 Makarovs. They used to sell like hundreds per box and stuff like that, but they don't have it anymore. Luckily, I do have a local gun store or a local ammo store in my city called The Ammo Guys, and they happen to have a couple boxes of 9x18 Makarov, and this is some S&B 9x18 Makarov we can see right there. And I was able to kind of just buy them out, and ever since they haven't had 9x18 Makarov left in stock. So the more I shoot this Makarov, the less I have. And again, this is what it looks like. I've probably showed this a million times, but 9x18 Makarov. And yeah, those are different things I like and dislike about the Makarov. Is there anything else I want to mention? Not really. I mean, I guess I could say like you can't exactly mount modern like red dots or any sort of flashlights on there, but honestly, it's such a non-issue to me. Anything of note? I think that's more or less it. So that's basically all the things I dislike about the Makarov itself. But overall, it's still my carry piece. It's still one of my favorite firearms in my collection, even though I only have 4. And yeah. Alright, so that's gonna do it for this video, ladies and lady boys. Hopefully you guys enjoyed my little deep dive into the Bulgarian Makarov. I know it wasn't necessarily as smooth as I wanted it to be, just because I did bang out this video today, and it took quite a while. And you might notice the costume change. I went airsofting for the very first time, and so yeah, that got a little sweaty. So I do apologize for the kind of the get up right now. But thank you guys for watching. If you enjoy this kind of content, of course, do all the YouTube type deals, you know, go subscribe, smash that like button, whatever they say nowadays. You guys know what to do by now. I also do have a TikTok page, an Instagram page, and a Discord, all of which are just called, again, Black Dragon Variety Show. So if you guys can go give a follow over there, it really helps me out. And yeah, without further ado, Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video and didn't find me overly boring or anything, but I'll say goodbye until next time. Maybe I'll get a tank for the video. See ya. One round left. Make it count.